Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Black History Month, but this program certainly transcends that. How many of you have seen this documentary? Good. For those of you that haven't, you should. By the way, we have some of the stars of the documentary in here that are featured, but you really should. Anybody that has interest in or been a part of the Central High story, this is a valuable addition to that collection, and it is really worth watching. To introduce our guest is Clinton School student Spencer Lucker, who is a graduate of Central High School, has strong connections to Central High School, and lives and breathes Central High School even to this day. He's also a graduate of the University of Arkansas, where he was a Bodenhammer Scholar. At the Clinton School, he's worked with the Girl Scouts of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas to expand Hispanic membership in that organization. He worked with an organization called Village Life in Tanzania, where he assisted in the evaluation of a newly constructed health clinic there. And he's completing a project with Minga, Peru, working on community development issues in that country. Right now, he is a senior fellow of public affairs with the Delta Regional Authority. And in May of 2012, God willing, and the creek don't rise, Liz, he will graduate from the Clinton School with his master's in public service degree. Ladies and gentlemen, Spencer Lucker.
Good evening, everyone. And yes, I do live and breathe Central by my black and gold. But good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming tonight. We are very lucky to be hearing from a special person who has successfully brought to life a piece of our history as Arkansans and members of the Little Rock community, powerfully telling the full story of Miss Daisy Lee Gatson Bates, the woman who helped shape the integration of Little Rock Central High School. As we all know, the events of September 1957 immortalized the city of Little Rock and Little Rock Central High School as part of the civil rights movement in our country. For many years, this event was a red mark on our city, serving as a reminder of the racial tensions and inequities that our city, state, and country have faced. In more recent years, though, this event has also become an impetus for change in the continued fight to eradicate racism in our communities. Little Rock Central High now serves as a positive inspiration for growth, achievement, and perseverance through the hardships that affect our society. However, all too often, the achievements and struggles of the individuals that made September 1957 so significant and inspiring often go unnoticed. Growing up in Little Rock and going to school at Little Rock Central High, the 1957 stage, play, and actors were, a huge part of my education. However, many people in our country grow up without knowing anything about the impact that leaders such as Daisy Bates had on our history. Fortunately for them, the film Daisy Bates, First Lady of Little Rock, does just this. Charged with 15 years of experience in the television and film industry, our speaker tonight embarked on a journey of 7 years of research, interviews, and experiences to discover the life of Daisy Bates. This film not only describes the role Miss Bates had in integrating Central High School, but also looks to reinforce the impact that she had on the civil rights movement in our country. Our speaker has excelled in her field, working for large corporations such as CNN and Coca-Cola, socially focused filmmakers Blackstone Inc. and The Faith Project, while still covering major world events such as the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Miss Sharon La Cruise.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for coming out. I want to thank Skip Rutherford for the invitation, and I want to thank Nikolai for arranging this. I started this journey about 7 years ago. I didn't have that much experience in documentary filmmaking. I had worked on a lot of other projects and had this dream that I wanted to do my own film. I get asked this question a lot: why Daisy Bates? I've had a lot of time now to think about it. There's a lot of reasons why Daisy Bates, but I came across her in a book in 1997 called I Dream a World. In this book, there's about 74 other incredible African-American women, but Daisy Bates' story captured my imagination. Daisy Bates' journey as a woman who lost her parents at a very young age to murder, and the abandonment of her father, and the journey that she took to become the woman who was instrumental in desegregating Central High School in '57, fascinated me. I wanted to know, when I started the journey, who this woman was. How did she go from such a traumatic childhood to become an how did she go from such a dramatic childhood to become an activist? And, you know, who was she and why didn't I know who she was? I had studied history in undergrad. I grew up in a family that loved history. I thought I knew a lot of history. She was not in any of my history books. I grew up in New York in the '70s, and we just never learned about women in the movement beyond Rosa Parks. So I decided I wanted to know who she was. I wrote her in 97, I wrote her, and I told her that. I told her I was fascinated by her story. I wanted to know more about her. I thought she deserved a documentary on her life. Unbeknownst to me at the time, she was already quite ill. She responded back through her attorney, and she said, yes, she would love to pursue the idea of doing a film on her life. At the time, I worked in Atlanta for Coca-Cola, so I wasn't even in the industry at the time of making films. And I wasted about 2 years trying to figure out how to do a film. Can I do a film? How to get to Arkansas? I'd never been here. And unfortunately, she passed away. I spent the next, like 7 years of my life, 8 years of my life, working on other people's films to learn the process and learn how to make a film before I finally took the plunge in 2004 when I journeyed to Arkansas for the first time. When I decided to do the film, I was inspired by what I had read about her, what Daisy Bates had written about herself. But I realized once I got here, I actually didn't know a lot about Daisy Bates. And once I started meeting people, and they were honestly telling me the things they knew about her, both the positives and the negatives, I realized I was here trying to do the wrong film. I had grown up at a time when documentaries were done of when people did documentaries, usually the figures were iconic. They were treated as iconic people that you know, as a regular person, you couldn't even dream of becoming that person or even accomplishing what they accomplished. And I had fallen victim to that same belief that if you're going to do a film on someone, the person should be perfect. I came here looking for a perfect person. I found Daisy Bates. I had moments of doubt where I thought, I don't really know this woman, and I don't know if I want to do a film on her. She's a lot more complicated than I realized, and that's not the film I wanted to make. I really wanted to make a film about this, you know, Rosa Parks, basically, another Rosa Parks. And then I realized, actually, that's the reason to do the film, because she was imperfect. She was more like me. She was more like everybody I knew. She was a woman who had her demons, and yet when she was called, she stepped up and did what she had to do. And for me, that was quite inspiring. So that's how my journey started. My first trip to Arkansas, I went south. I went to her hometown of Huttig. which, how many people know Huddig? How many people have ever been south? I'm kind of proud of that, being an outsider, that I've been to Huddig. It's near the Louisiana border. There's probably a population about 600. The town is, it's not the same as it was 100 years ago when Daisy Bates grew up there, but it's still a mill town that exists because of the existence of the sawmill. So it's kind of stuck in time in its own way. There's some beautiful people down there. There's still people who remember Daisy Bates' story and the loss of her mother. They have a street similar to Little Rock, named after her, where she grew up. My journey started there, and once I took the plunge and started meeting more people in Arkansas and telling them I'm doing this film, I found myself in a situation where I actually had to do the film. It's one thing to talk about it, and there's another to do the film. I don't know how many of you know what the process is like to make a documentary film. I had worked, like I said, on a lot of documentary films, and I learned the hard lesson about the difference between being, I used to be an associate producer, I had title as like coordinating producer, but I wasn't the director or the lead producer. I would be the person that made things happen and was behind the scenes helping to get the film together. But what I found once I took on the role of making this film is there's a big difference between being the president and being the vice president. And it's a hard lesson to learn. I would go into the edit room on the films I worked on, or I would meet with the producers and I would look at the film they're working on, and I would, give my 2 cents, and then I'd walk out the edit room and basically good luck with that. Once it was my project, there was nowhere for me to go. It was my baby, and I was in charge of this baby, and it's excruciating. When I tell people what it's like to make a documentary film, I think the best way to describe it, it's as if you've jumped off a cliff without a parachute. And you are halfway down the mountain, and there's no going back. Once I started coming here, and I got all my friends in New York involved with helping me on the project, they're asking you about it, there's no going back. The more people I met and the more people I sucked into my web of doing this film, the more I had to do the film. The biggest problem with doing a film, though, is it's very expensive to do a historical film. The going rate these days, well, I started 7 years ago, but the going rate nowadays anywhere between $500,000–600,000 to over $1 million to produce a documentary film. The archival material, I don't know how many of you got to see the film, but it's very heavy on archival footage and stills. There are almost 400 stills in the film, over 200 clips of footage. They're from all around the world, and it's not cheap. So in the process of doing a film, you could have this great idea and be excited about it, but the monetary aspect it's a challenge for most filmmakers. It's unfortunately clearing the rights for that footage. It's really a challenge for the industry. So a lot of people aren't even doing as many historical docs, which is unfortunate. Because in the 7 years I've worked on the film, 2 of the people in the film have already passed away, and 1 of the people in the film had a stroke. That just, to me, is a reminder of why it's so important to work, to support documentary films, to watch them, to come out like you're doing now, to buy them, to talk about them, to teach them in schools, and encourage the next generation to watch them as well. Because that's history, and that's our history, and when these people pass away, with them goes all these wonderful stories. And for 2 of the people in the film, they're not necessarily famous people, so you wouldn't necessarily know Beatrice Epps. She had lived a pretty ordinary life, like most of us do. But she was Daisy Bates's best friend as a child. And when I met her in 2004, she was 91. So she was already quite old and already had a form of dementia. So she has passed on and didn't get to see the finished film. I know most of you know Jefferson Thomas passed away and wasn't able to see the film either. So I feel really privileged that I was able to get his interview and get his story before he passed away. So, you know, I always encourage people when I come out to support documentary films and the filmmakers, because it's very much a labor of love on our part, and it's, for us, it is a lot about love, because that's what kind of keeps you going in 7 years, because it's a tough journey. The biggest struggle is, like I said, it's always monetary for most people. Normally it shouldn't take 7 years, but I tended to work on the film part-time and then had a full-time job most of the time. What I'd like to also say is the process of making the film is very much, when they say it takes a village to raise a child, it's the same thing with a film. When you see the credits, there's hundreds of people in the film, and that's what it takes to make a film. And I feel really privileged to have come to Arkansas from 2004 and to have met some really wonderful people here who became part of that village and who over the years have supported me. They have let me stay at their house. They have introduced me to other people. They have come to see me in New York, and I feel like we have, you know, they've become part of my extended family. And that's one of the beautiful things about making the film, is in trying to unravel who Daisy Bates was and what her life was about. I was able to learn a lot about her through the people that she knew and met. And for most of them, they were very honest with me because I was very honest with them. Once I realized the type of film I was going to make, I didn't try to trick them into thinking it was going to be anything than it was. I always told them I was going to tell a very honest portrayal of the woman that she was, and they respected that. And they were, in turn, very honest with me about how they felt about her. And I think I can overall sum it up to say that they loved her for all that she was and all that she wasn't, which, you know, that's probably true for most of us. That's what we'd want from people in our lives. I think when I started the journey, beyond why Daisy Bates, I was trying to answer the question of, could the Central High crisis have happened and played out the way it did without a Daisy Bates being involved? That was one of the key questions, because people had put that question to me. They had their own doubts about her role and her relevance, and whether it was overplayed and oversold, and whether she got more publicity than she deserved, and whether she was that instrumental in the crisis. And I can honestly say, after spending 7 years speaking to people and gathering evidence and reading and looking at footage and reading a million different books about the subject, I can honestly say that I feel, yes, she was instrumental, and no, I don't think that the crisis would have played out in the same way without her role. She's the only one in Little Rock at that time that had the skill sets, that knew how to deal with the press. She's the only one at the time that's head of the NAACP and had the national office behind her. She was the only one at the time. She didn't have children. And she was independent of, she wasn't working for anyone. Her and her husband, Elsie Bates, owned the newspaper, the State Press. So I feel like all of those things combined made her a critical force to do what she did do. And I think if you watch the film, you can also see for yourself and, you know, decide for yourself. Was she instrumental? A lot of the work she was doing was before 57. 57 is the culmination of work she and her husband were doing since the 40s when they came to Arkansas. They came in the 1940s to shake the town up, and they did. They were already fighting a lot of different battles on different fronts with their newspaper. And in doing that, a lot of people told me that politicized and educated the community and kind of prepared them for the Brown decision, which was to come. So for me, the answer is a definite yes. There's always going to be, obviously, people who disagree with that, and that is the beauty of Daisy Bates. She's a very complicated person. She encouraged a lot of she had complicated relationships with people, and people had very complicated feelings about her. So I think that's actually part of the thing that makes her most fascinating, is that she is definitely multidimensional. And I don't think even in 7 years I totally figured out everything about her or all her motivations and things like that. So I would love to open it up to questions so I don't just keep talking and talking.
There we go. Let's do questions. And raise your hand and we'll get the mic to you. Ms. Abrams, welcome back. Annie Abrams has been ill. She is on the road to recovery. Sharon, she is our #1 attendee at programs, and she's been missing. So welcome back. The floor is yours.
Okay, Annie, please ask me an easy question.
I am going to ask you an easy question. I've asked them at my house many times. Sharon, as you have gone around, and I know you're going to go back to Hudditch, and you've been in other cities long before you got to this one as a premier, what is the consensus that you think in 2012? Is it a product that's helping America, or is it contributing to the divisiveness that many of us think we are experiencing? What contribution is the film Daisy Bates, the First Lady of Little Rock, having on this continent?
Thank you, Annie. Well, you know, the response I've gotten, the film's been showing sometimes with me, sometimes not with me. It's shown all the way in Hawaii. From here to Hawaii, it's been seen, and it's already aired nationally. The response at the end of the film is always really positive. People walk away really fascinated by Daisy Bates and interested in why they didn't know her story. They're interested in delving into women, the other women in the movement, because when I end it, it's dedicated to the unsung women in the movement, which she's just one of many. People are interested in this constant struggle over education and what's going on in our schools today. And it comes up often how our young people are taking that education for granted. After all the Little Rock Nine did and Daisy Bates did, you know, to fight for equal education, they fought so hard to go in through those doors, and now kids are running out in droves. So as far as I'm concerned, the feedback's always positive. I feel like it's positive for Arkansas as well, to remind people of that time in history and Arkansas's role in the civil rights movement, because I've seen a lot of timelines over the years where they actually skip Little Rock, where the timeline goes from Montgomery, Emmett Till, and then it jumps to the lunch counters in the 60s, and Little Rock's not even on the timeline. So I feel like everything about it, to me, in this time and place is positive.
Yes, question right here.
Yes, ma'am. Once again, thank you for coming tonight. But
It's a pleasure.
do you still currently live in New York?
Yes, I do.
Have you noticed, or did you get a chance to do a consensus about the schools in New York? Now, is Daisy Bates, is it coming back into the history books in the New York school system, or is it still not there?
Well, the film is still fairly new, and the process of actually impacting curriculum is a complicated one. When I show the film, like I said, people are really excited about it, and I already heard from a lot of different people who want to help me get it into the curriculum. And again, it's not just about Daisy Bates, and they understand that they really want women to take their rightful place in the civil rights movement where they belong. And they see that, you know, this film as being a critical tool in doing that. So I guess the answer to your question is not yet. It takes a while after a film's made. You have to come up with a comprehensive educational outreach plan. You have to actually get funding, and you have to create like small modules of the film, like in 5-minute pieces, and then with it a booklet. And so it's a bit of a process, but it's in the works, definitely.
Yes, sir. We'll do back and forth, yeah.
It's interesting, ladies first, when you hear my question.
Hi.
I wanted to say that I saw the movie and first compliment you. It is a wonderful film. I got to see it when you screened it at UALR. Mm-hmm. And I agree that Daisy Bates was an incredibly complex woman. And I think a lot of that had to do with the role that she played in such an incredible leadership capacity at a time when you did not see a lot of women, let alone Black women, playing that kind of role. So my question is, having seen and met so many people who knew her in depth, would you attribute that complexity more to gender or race?
Her complexity?
Yes.
I really, I mean, all of the above, but when it comes to Daisy Bates, a lot of what's driving her and a lot of the complexity about her is her childhood and what happened to her mother and that loss and the abandonment by her father. That seems to be one of the big motivating factors, is that experience, which that was definitely learning about racism for her as a young child. And then growing up in a society as a woman, she comes from a generation of women that I hope somebody does a film on, that I've come across before. There's a generation of women from her time period and before who they have all this potential and they're really smart. But they're coming of age in a time when women are being told there's no place for you in our society to be those things. And so these women like Daisy Bates had to find really untraditional ways of breaking through. And she's really the crazy one because she's on television. Every time I see that footage, I'm thinking, what people must have been thinking. In the 1950s, here's this Black woman. You didn't see Black people on television that often. Maybe entertainers if you're lucky, but to be speaking about her thoughts and her views in the 1950s, very unusual. And she chose, you know, untraditional path, and she had a husband who was 12 years older than her, and he was able to also help her on that path. But I find there's a whole generation of these incredible women who they had to subjugate a lot of who they were and what they wanted to be because they were in a society that told them that they couldn't be any of those things.
We'll go
Derek?
back. Yeah, we might as well go back.
Hi, Sharon.
Hello, Derek. Derek's a filmmaker as well.
I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the process and challenges of fundraising, and if you thought that race played a role in those challenges and process.
Oh my God, Derek. I'm being taped, I think, on television. Well, I have a confession to make. I also work at the Ford Foundation. I found that I was like, God really does have a sense of humor. I am desperately searching for funds, and I spend half of my time giving away money to filmmakers, but could not give a grant to myself, because that's a conflict of interest. Did race and, I mean, money, the process of getting a film done, a historical film, it's, like I said, it's largely, the struggle is funding for filmmakers. And also the type of films that are being made today, a lot of the films that funders are looking for, they are really attracted to contemporary stories, social justice issues, which are very clear-cut because in the case of Ford, we look at it like we can use this film to advance work in the field of. My film being historical, it's a little bit more murky how you would use it. It can be used, but it's not as clear cut. So historical films struggle a little bit to find that niche. So that was part of the problem. Part of it is the historical. They're not as popular a genre anymore as they used to be for funders. The issue of race, gender and race. In the beginning, doing the subject of Daisy Bates was not that hard. My first funders, the National Black Programming Consortium, was happy to give me first money in. NEH is very pro-historical films, so that was easy as well. I got money from the Southern Humanities Council. I've got money from the Arkansas Humanities Council here and the New York State Council for the Arts. So there are certain organizations that they're tried and true, and they do support historical documentaries, and they were happy that it was about a woman of color that had been lost in the history. I did start to hit a wall eventually where it was harder and harder to get the last amount of funding to finish the film. And part of that, again, was because the shift in those 7 years I was working on the film, the shift from historical documentaries and like Ken Burns and Eyes on the Prize kind of films, the needs started to change in the industry. So I think it was, there's a problem with doing a film, not just the fact that she's African American, it's also the fact that she's not with us. That is also a big thing in films. Even in historical films, funders prefer if the person's alive in the film telling their own story, not somebody who's passed away and you're seeing them in archival material. So that also was a struggle. That also hurt the film somewhat, and that's how I ended up in the film. I originally didn't want to be in the film. I really wanted to do a typical historical documentary and have like the voice of God narrator tell you everything. And that's what I started to do. And, like I said, I hit a wall with the funding. The film was not as compelling. And so I found it, my friends started to talk to me about it, and they kept saying, when you talk about the film, you're so excited about it and you're so engaged. I think maybe you should think of being in the film and taking us on this journey, because then maybe that would kind of enhance it and it would be more accessible for people than the usual historical documentary, which is, you're a little bit separated from it. And that's how I ended up in it, and that's how I was able to get the last bit of funding.
Hillary, all the way in the back.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Hillary, and I'm a Clinton School student. I'm curious, it sounds like you got into the industry of filmmaking because you were so interested in making a film about Daisy Bates. Now that you're in the industry, it sounds like you went through a lot of challenges getting to this point, and say there's so many challenges involved in making a documentary. Do you want to make more? And if so, who about? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry I gave you that impression. That wasn't the only reason I got. I actually, I just didn't want to tell you my old long childhood story and put you all to sleep, but I grew up in the 70s watching PBS, and I always loved documentary films. I always wanted to do documentary films, but somehow, when I graduated, I couldn't study it in undergrad. I studied history. I was never quite on the path to do documentary films. And growing up, I didn't know any filmmakers when I was a kid, so I didn't even know how to become one. But I always loved them as a medium, and I enjoyed watching them. So I took a lot of turns, like at CNN and all these different things, away from the path, but I always did want to make documentary films. I always had a list that I kept of like 20 films I've always wanted to make over the years, even when I wasn't in the industry. And I would, look at my list, and I had, I'd do some research on it, and I would start researching a topic and I could never finish it. and then I go into something else. I totally couldn't focus on any one topic. And I think there was just something about Daisy Bates and her story that made me stick with it. But I had always dreamed of doing a film, but for some reason her film was the film that made me focus. And like I said, once I made that commitment and I came here and I started meeting people and telling people I'm working on the film, then I had no choice. I finally had to finish the film. I couldn't just drop it. I don't know what my next film will be or if I'll do another film. 7 years is a long time. I was practically a child when I started. I had no gray hair. I was like 7 years, that's a child in the 2nd grade. I don't know. I have ideas, but I don't know if any of them are going to be, something I will pursue. I do know I want to get this film out more and have it, live beyond its broadcast, which would be a comprehensive educational outreach plan and getting into schools and stuff like that. And I have a full-time job. I work at the Ford Foundation, and I love my job. So I'd like to do that for a while and have normal hours again.
Yes.
Where are her papers, her letters and things, documents, are they all in one place?
No, her stuff is split up. Half of her stuff is in Wisconsin at the Historical Society, and then the other half is at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Apparently, she gave her papers to the Wisconsin Historical Society in the 60s, I believe. And I think she gave them everything to do with like Central High and up until a certain point, and then the back half went to Fayetteville. She even gave them the rock that came through her window. That's all in Wisconsin. I was told that she was a little worried to give her papers and photographs and all her correspondence that has to do with 57 at that time, leave it here in Arkansas, because she was worried it would mysteriously just disappear, because she knew that there was still, residue of anger and rage towards her, even into the 60s and 70s. So she gave Fayetteville the back end of her material that's not as controversial.
Other in the back.
Is somebody in the back?
Someone made mention of getting, your film into schools, and this is about, a particular person in a civil rights movement, and talking about getting film into curriculum, about a topic that 30 or 40 years ago may not have been popular, particularly in this state, in the South. Do you see any parallels to the attempted referendum in California to take away the gay rights curriculum that the state has said will be taught in schools? Arizona is going against they're overturning their Chicano studies in their programs, and our neighboring state of Tennessee has banned the mentioning of the word gay until a student reaches at least high school. Do you see any, you're struggling there, do you have any advice for people who want to get the rights of other civil rights movements into the classroom where it may in fact be illegal?
I can't say, to be honest, I wouldn't say I'm struggling to, it's really more on me that I haven't had the time to organize and find partners to do the curriculum. I think people are actually pretty open to it, so it's a different kind of struggle. That's a tough one. These are all civil rights issues, obviously. And there is a war going on, and there has been for a long time, about what our kids learn and, what they should learn. And I find it a little bit scary, because when you think about you're basically tampering with history, which will impact people for generations, and how they think and how kids think, and what they're able to discuss and talk about in school. I think that is a very scary topic, because it reminds me of when I was studying Russia. And whenever a new czar or leader took over, they were able to step in and just rewrite the history books and erase anybody's name on any topic they didn't want discussed, which they did. They erased, and they kept changing the cities to, you know, to cater to whoever was popular at the time. I think it's a really scary thing. I mean, there's obviously a lot of various ways that you fight that. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on how you would fight that, but I would think as parents that you have to take a really active role in what your kids are being taught. I feel that when it comes to education, that we're depending sometimes way too much on schools to carry the burden of teaching our kids. And when these issues are starting to come up, some of this stuff you need to teach your kids yourself. I was taught a lot of African American history in my home because I have a sister who's 8 years older than me, and she studied Black history as a major at Hunter College. And she would come home and teach me all that she learned, and that's how I became more interested. And she'd sit me in front of the TV, and we'd watch documentaries together and various shows on PBS. So I think one way to combat what you can't do politically is to be doing it personally, whether it's with your kids or your nieces and nephews, is to buy them a book, get them away from playing on the computer and Facebook, and also kind of intervene as well in what they're learning in schools. That's what you have to do to keep it going, because I don't think we're ever going to be 100% satisfied with what our kids are learning in school. And there is only so much time in the day that they can learn anyway. So I think it's to probably become more actively involved in what your kids are learning.
We have time for one more.
I saw the film at the Thompson Library here through a community affairs program, and it was mentioned that you had to cut 17 or 18 minutes.
Longer than that.
Longer than what exactly was that, and how did you choose? And I understand part of it concerns some community organizing work that she did, or worked in a community.
No, it wasn't even that. It was, yeah. What it is that PBS, the viewership has changed and people's attention span has changed. So only certain films get to be 90 minutes now on, PBS. So my film in particular, they wanted it to be 52 minutes. My actual film is 78 minutes. So I had to basically butcher my film. I mean, that's how you feel as a filmmaker. It was excruciating. It was excruciating. I cut down a lot of stuff. I had to cut out Mitchellville, and the work Daisy Bates did there. I had to cut out her time in New York. I had to cut out a major bite from Jefferson Thomas. That was my favorite bite in the film, but he wasn't talking about Daisy Bates. He was talking about himself, and I had other things in the film from him that were more important, and I had to choose, and his story is very long. I had to cut out Daisy Bates being a party girl in the 40s, and poor Elsie not having a clue what was going on. She's partying, and he's working at the paper. He doesn't know what's going on. She's partying with soldiers and having a good time, and that evolution of her going from that party girl to somebody of substance. I had to drop all of that. So those are like the big major chunks. I had to drop out people that I really loved in the film, because once you take one thing out, then they're kind of just popping up in the film in other places. So you just had to pull. It was horrible. It was horrible.
Where did you shoot the film?
Good question. I already screened here at the University of Arkansas. I don't have any other screenings planned to come back. At some point, I plan to sell the longer version on my website. I'm just working on designing the jacket of the DVD and stuff like that. So you might be able to buy it at some point. And, you know, if I'm invited, I'm always happy to come back. I look at Arkansas like my second home now. You can't get rid of me.
I think we have to remember in this that this story, and you really do need to see the film. It really is good. What happened in '57 was America's greatest constitutional crisis since the Civil War, when the President of the United States sent troops to enforce the law of the land. And that had not happened since the Civil War. The person who had a lot of contact with the administration, with the various department heads, with the President himself, through the National Office of the NAACP, with Thurgood Marshall, and with others, was Daisy Bates. And Sharon, you have told a very remarkable story. Sharon La Cruise.
Thank you.